What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back, bringing you another top Pokemon card auctions of the week recap. Folks, what a week we had. Every week is just insane anymore. We're going to take a look at several modern graded cards, including some newly graded cards from Terastal Festival that just hit the market. And we'll also be going over several high-end graded cards and some high-end booster box sales as well. It's going to be a longer video, folks. A lot of auctions to go through, so stick around to the very end. Folks, a quick shout out to today's auction recap sponsor. It is KantoShark.com, the ultimate Pokemon card marketplace. On KantoShark.com, they have had a string of high-end vintage and modern grails that have sold. And they are always replenishing their inventory with super popular and very desirable slabs such as these guys right here, as well as some minty and authentic booster boxes for sale. So after the recap, head over to KantoShark.com. A link will be in the description of this video. Check out what they have and pick yourself up something pretty this Christmas season. Alright folks, let's start out this recap with some newly graded cards from Terastal Festival. We have a lot of special art rares to go through. If you are interested, here is a PSA 10 EVEX SAR that sold for $212.50. Here's a special art rare Jolteon EX that sold for $207, while this Vaporeon EX sold for $232. Here is a Glaceon EX that sold for an even $300, and then we saw two Sylveon EX cards. One sold for $315, the other for $342. And then, of course, the most expensive card in this set, the Umbreon EX, sold for a staggering $750. On to the card that just won't quit, the Pikachu Van Gogh promo. Hit some massive prices this week, as always. Here's one that ended an auction for $560 as a PSA 10. Here's another PSA 10 that sold with the Pokemon Center mug, I believe. So you got two pieces here, sold for $570. And then here's a lot of 3 PSA 10 copies that sold for $1,500 this week. Here we have the Mewtwo GX. It continues to do phenomenally well as a PSA 10, selling this week for $1,475. On to a couple of Japanese Black Label cards. Here's a Black Label Alakazam EX from the 151 set, sold for $1,445. Here's a Black Label Japanese Blastoise EX from the 151 set that sold for $2,025. And then here is a Black Label Mew EX that sold for $2,425. Here from Shiny Treasure EX is a Black Label Charizard EX that sold for $2,550. And then here we have one of the shadiest listings I have ever seen. It's just slimy through and through. Let me explain it to you. It is a illustration rare Magikarp from Paldea Evolved that sold for $899. And what makes this listing especially snakish and slimy, is the fact that this is a Portuguese Magikarp. And nowhere in this listing does it say that it's a Portuguese Magikarp. The only clue that you have is the fact that it's Portuguese, so you really got to look at the card. But there's no mention of the word Portuguese in the title. Even on the slab itself, the way the label is titled, it doesn't say Portuguese, it's just PT. So it is very easy to deceive someone into thinking this would be an English card. I don't know, folks. Maybe whoever bought this was well aware this is a Portuguese example, but I just think it is a seller's responsibility to list a card that's in another language as the language that it's in. I think it's very shady. I think it's very intentional that they were trying to deceive whoever bought this, because let's say you skim over this, it looks like a English Magikarp, and you buy it. Well, it goes to authentication via eBay, and then it gets sent to you, and then it's basically no givesies backsies. So if you get the card and you're like, wait a minute, I thought this was an English Magikarp. Nope, it's Portuguese. And it's authenticity guarantee, so you're stuck with it. Now, at the end of the day, it is, of course, the buyer's responsibility to look over the card. And ultimately, it is their, it's their fault if they bought a Portuguese Magikarp thinking it was English. But it's still very slimy to me to not put that in the title. It's very deceiving. I don't know. What do you think, folks? Up next, we have a couple of booster box sales on eBay. Here is an XY Steam Siege booster box. A set that people keep saying is underrated. It's an 8-year-old set. And this is just a fantastic set. I don't understand all the hate. Sold for $335, which is pathetic. Yeah. Now, Steam Siege is one of the worst sets of all time. Anybody who tells you otherwise is just trying to shill it. Now on to some XY boxes that aren't complete garbage. Here is a Roaring Skies booster box that sold for $870, as well as this Primal Clash booster box that sold for $740. And then we have the XY Evolutions booster box that sold for $1,100. Here we have a blister pack of sorts of 2 Neo Genesis booster packs, I believe, that sold for $1,066. Here we have the Elite Trainer boxes from XY Primal Clash that sold for $4,101. And these older Elite Trainer boxes, like I said before, from early XY and the black and white era, can be quite pricey because they are quite elusive on the market. On to the Fanatics Collect weekly auction block, we have this Japanese no-number Venusaur in PSA 10. This is a card that sold for $3,480 this week. Here is a base set unlimited Chansey that has been doing very well the past few weeks as a PSA 10. This week it sold for $3,240. From Jungle, we saw a first edition Flareon sell for $1,980, and from Fossil, we saw a first edition Moltres Holo that sold for $1,140. A couple of cards from the Neo series. Here is a BGS 9.5 Typhlosion 17 first edition Holo that sold for $2,310. Here's a PSA 10 first edition Scizor from Neo Discovery that sold for $2,520, along with this Ho-Oh from Neo Revelation, one of the best Ho-Oh cards of all time, that also sold for $2,520. Up next, we have a string of cards from Call of Legends, in my opinion, one of the top 10 best sets of all time. Here is the Palkia from Call of Legends in PSA 10 that sold for $1,500. Here is the Dialga that sold for $1,800. The Kyogre sold for $1,890. The Deoxys sold for $2,220. And the Groudon sold for $2,880. Here is a Celebi from the Pop Series 2 in PSA 10, a card that I never see come by as a PSA 10. This might be the first time on the auction recap we cover this particular card. Sold for $3,480 this week. Here is a Charizard from EX Crystal Guardians that sold for $3,960. And then here from Legendary Collection is a holographic Dark Dragonite in PSA 10. Very low pop card, only has 14 PSA 10 examples, sold for $4,080 this week. Here is a Mega Charizard EX Secret Rare card from Flashfire that sold for $4,200 this week. Here is a Gold Star Alakazam from EX Crystal Guardians, sold for $4,680. And then here is a Holo Umbreon from Skyridge that sold for $6,600. Here is a PSA 9 Topps Chrome Techno Charizard. And if you don't know, the Techno variants from the Top Chrome series are the most expensive and most desirable. This card sold as a PSA 9 for $8,400, while a CGC 9 no rarity symbol base set Charizard sold for $10,200. Here we have a Japanese Gold Star Charizard in first edition that sold as a PSA 10 for $15,000 this week. And then here we have the very elusive PSA 10 Holo Charizard from Legendary Collection. This is the regular Holo, folks, not the reverse Holo. Sold for $20,400. One of the lowest pop base set artworks you can get in PSA 10, which is why it goes for over $20,000. Here is a Japanese Gold Star Mew that sold for $20,400 as well. Here is a Gold Star Mudkip in PSA 10. This is the English variant that also sold for $20,400. Here we have a PSA 9 National Finalist Holo Masters Key, sold for $23,400. And then we have this 2009 Japanese Design Contest winner. This is the third grade winner of Arceus in PSA 10, sold for $26,400. Here we have a CGC 10 Japanese Beta Presentation Mewtwo card that sold for $7,200. Then here we saw a PSA 9 Corporate History Chansey card that sold for $12,000. And then we saw numerous high-end booster box sales on Heritage last week. Here is an unlimited base set booster box that sold for $16,250, while this Japanese base set media factory box sold for $26,250. We saw an unlimited booster box of Jungle sell for $8,125, while the first edition box sold for $13,750. Here is an unlimited fossil box that sold for $8,125, while the first edition box sold for $12,500. Here is an unlimited Team Rocket booster box that sold for $9,375, and an unlimited Gym Challenge booster box that sold for $10,625. Here also is an unlimited Gym Heroes booster box that sold for $8,750, and then the Japanese Gym Heroes box sold for $15,000. Here is an unlimited Neo Revelation booster box that sold for $18,750, and then here is a legendary sale. Is a legendary collection booster box, sealed. Very, very tough to get your hands on a box like this. Sold for $60,026. We also saw a couple of high-end graded cards on Heritage last week. Here is a PSA 10 Gold Star Pikachu that sold for $7,500. We saw the legendary birds here. This is a Japanese fossil test issue card that sold for $10,937. The Zapdos sold for $10,000, and the Articuno also sold for $10K. Here we have a CGC7 Beta Test Print Blastoise/Magneton card that sold for $16,250, while the CGC9 Venusaur/Ninetales Beta Test Print card sold for $17,500, and then the CGC9 Charizard and Nidoking test print card sold for $47,500. Here we have a PSA 7 2023 number 2 trainer World's Championship card that sold for an even $40,000 last week. And then we saw this Gold Star Vaporeon. This is the 10,000 point play promo card that sold for $2,250. The 30,000 point Gold Star Flareon here sold for $6,875. And then the 50,000 point Gold Star Espeon in PSA 10 sold for an even $50,000. So 50,000 points, $50,000. Here we have a PSA 7 number 3 trainer World Summer Challenge Secret Super Battle Best in Japan card sold for $27,500, while the number 2 trainer in PSA 8 sold for $32,500, along with the number 1 trainer also in PSA 8 that also sold for $32,500. And then the auction of the week we got to give to this CGC9 autographed Pikachu Illustrator card that sold for a whopping $204,000. This is a Takumi Akubane signed example, went for over $200,000. What do y'all think of that? That concludes the recap, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. Support the channel by going over to kantoshark.com and seeing what they have available. That's all I got today. Thanks again, folks. I'll catch you in my next one.